The air inside the Echo of Serenity was always a little too sterile, a little too still. Dr. Lee Min-ji preferred the sounds of the forest moon, Kelvar, outside the viewport. The soft, sighing calls of the floating jelly spores, the rustle of the cobalt blue ferns. It was a peaceful place for a xenobiology outpost. Or it had been that the change was subtle at first. The jungle outside went quiet. Not a normal quiet, but a thick, heavy silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. Min-ji noticed it at her workstation, her instruments showing a sudden, inexplicable drop in ambient biosignatures from the surrounding forest. She frowned, tapping the screen. "Captain, are you seeing this environmental shift?" Captain Park Jun's voice crackled over the com from the security hub. "Seeing it, Doctor. No seismic activity. No atmospheric changes. It's just quiet." His tone was flat, professional, but Min-ji had worked with him for 2 years. She heard the faint edge of concern in engineering. Kim Tae-shik was the first to feel it. A headache, sharp and sudden, loomed behind his eyes. He rubbed his temples, blaming the stale coffee. Then the lights in the corridor outside his workshop flickered. Not a power fluctuation. The system diagnostics on his wrist tablet were all green. This was different. The light didn't just dim. It seemed to wilt, the brightness leaching away as if swallowed by shadow. A cold shiver, one that had nothing to do with the climate controls, traced down his spine. Lee Aina, the junior linguist, was in the archives, cross-referencing fungal spore patterns with ancient geological surveys. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so strong she had to grip the edge of the desk. A strange taste filled her mouth, coppery and alien. For a split second, she wasn't in the archive. She was somewhere dark and cold, with multiple shifting perspectives, a hunger that was not for food, but for light, for sound, for thought. She gasped, the vision vanishing as quickly as it came, leaving her trembling and confused. "Report." Park Jun's voice was harder now, echoing through the outpost's central address system. "All personnel, report any anomalies. Now." The reports came in, fragmented and scared. Headaches, dizziness, shadows moving where there were no objects to cast them. A feeling of being watched from inside the walls. Then the outer perimeter alarm blared, a harsh, physical sound that was a relief after the creeping silence. Park Jun brought the external feeds up on the main hub screens. At first, there was nothing, just the still, darkening forest. Then, at the very edge of the energy shield's glow, something moved. It was less a shape and more a suggestion, a pooling of darkness that slid between the trees. It had too many limbs, or perhaps not enough, its form refusing to settle in the eye. Another appeared, then another. They made no sound. "What are they?" Min-ji whispered, her face pale on the com-screen feed. "Unknown," Park said, his hands flying over the tactical console. "No thermal signature. No discernible life signs. They're ghosts." He activated the outpost's defensive turrets. The automated guns whirred, tracked, and fired searing bolts of plasma into the forest. The bolts passed right through the shifting shadows, scorching the trees behind them. The things did not react. And then the whispering started. It wasn't a sound in the ears. It was a pressure in the mind, a cold, oily thought that was not your own. It started as a faint hum of wrongness, then grew into distinct, terrible feelings. The crushing weight of a loneliness spanning millennia. The despair of a light that has gone out forever. The sharp, predatory intent of a hunter in the dark. For Park Jun, it was the memory of his first command failure. The faces of lost crewmates, amplified 1,000 times, screaming at him that he would fail again. For Kim Tae-shik, it was the complex. Beautiful schematics in his mind, twisting into symbols of ruin and decay, his own logic turning against him. For Minji, it was the horrifying sense of every living thing she had ever studied dying at once, their life forces snuffed out by a vast, uncaring void that Li Ana, in the archive, collapsed to her knees. Her mind, trained in patterns and languages, was assaulted not by feeling, but by a chaotic, screaming jumble of alien memories, landscapes of crystal and smoke, wars fought with thoughts, the terrifying visage of a creature that was pure. Silent noise, psychic attack. Park Jun snarled, fighting to push the invasive thoughts aside to focus on his duty. Seal the inner bulkheads. Everyone to the central core. Now, it was too late for some. Crewman Park, a botanist, was found in the greenhouse, staring blankly at a wall, a low, continuous moan coming from his lips, his eyes empty. Engineer No was curled in a fetal position under a console, repeating the same string of numbers over and over, tears streaming down her unseeing face. Their minds had been scoured, their consciousness harvested, leaving only broken shells. The survivors, about a dozen of them, huddled in the reinforced central core. The lights were low, powered by Kim's emergency reroutes. The main power was failing under a strain the systems couldn't identify or fight. The psychic pressure was a constant now, a drumbeat of dread against their skulls. They could see the things, the Xylos. Minji had named them from a fragmented database match on the monitors. They were phasing through the outer layers of the outpost now, their shadowy forms passing through metal and polymer like smoke. Their weapon was their presence. Their hunger was a vacuum that sucked at the soul. Captain Park's face was grim, etched with exhaustion and the effort of holding his own mind together. Physical weapons are useless. Shields are failing. They're in the habitation wing. He looked at Minji. Doctor, any weakness? Anything at all? Minji, her professional calm a thin veneer over terror, shook her head. They're like nothing on record. They don't communicate. They just broadcast this despair. They're consuming consciousness itself. Kim Tae-shik hunched over a portable terminal, cursed. Communications are completely jammed. Not by a signal, but by that. That noise in our heads. The distress beacon can't get through. A profound hopelessness settled over the room. They were trapped, listening to the mental death cries at their outpost, feeling the Xylos draw closer. They had hours, maybe less, before the whispers broke them all dot in the corner. Li Ana was shivering, a data slate clutched to her chest. She had dragged it from the archive. While the others fought, she had searched desperately for any mention of these monsters, for any hope. The slate contained logs from a forgotten first contact vessel, the Odyssey, that had encountered something similar centuries ago. The logs were corrupted, full of gaps and mad ravings. But one phrase, pulled from the vessel's recorded telepathic intercepts, was repeated by the alien attackers over and over. It was a warning, a scream of terror. She stood up, her legs unsteady. The room looked at her. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible over the psychic hum. I found something, she said. She held up the slate, the alien symbols glowing faintly. The Xylos. They're afraid of something. Park Jun stared at her. Afraid? Of what? Ana took a shaky breath and read the translated phrase, the one that had made the Odyssey's linguist mark it with a high-priority flag. The words felt strange and heavy in the suffocating air of the core. They say, beware the unsilenced. It walks in the void of thought. It wills where we whisper. The silence in the central core was heavy, broken only by the low, shuddering hum of overtaxed life support. The words hung in the air, the unsilenced. To the terrified crew, it sounded like a myth, a ghost story from a lost ship's log. But it was the only thing that had ever made the Xylos sound afraid. Captain Park Jun was the first to move. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took the data slate from Leanna's trembling hands. His eyes scanned the fragmented logs. There were technical readouts mixed with the mad scribbles of a crew losing their minds. But amidst the chaos were clear, repeated patterns, frequency modulations, quantum resonance signatures, a specific atomic particle decay rate used as a carrier wave. "This isn't a prayer," he said, his voice rough. "It's a beacon." A very specific, very loud homing signal. Kim Tae-shik looked up from his own terminal, his face pale. "A beacon to what? To this unsilenced?" "Captain, this is data from a ship that went mad. We can't trust it." Dr. Lee Min-ji stepped forward, her scientist's mind latching on to the details. "Look at the patterns, Tae-shik. It's precise, deliberate. The Odyssey didn't just hear the Xylos say this. They recorded the context. The Xylos weren't just afraid in theory. They were afraid because they had encountered it. This signal, it summoned it before." "Them," Leanna whispered, correcting her. "It summoned them, humans." A new kind of quiet fell over the group. Humans. Earth was a middle-tier power, known for stubbornness and adaptability, not for being ancient cosmic terrors. They traded, they explored, they were normal. The idea was absurd. And if it does work? Kim Tae-shik challenged, gesturing wildly at the monitor showing the shadowy forms gliding through their mess hall. "We trade one monster for another? We have no idea what this thing they called would be like. What choice do we have?" Minji's question was quiet but sharp. "The Xylos are in the lower decks. The psychic pressure is increasing. In an hour, we will either be like Crewman Park, or we will be dead. This is a chance. The only one." Captain Park's jaw was tight. He looked at the faces of his crew, the fear, the desperation, the fading light in their eyes. He was a man of protocol, of regulations. Summoning an unknown entity from a centuries-old warning was the furthest thing from protocol. But watching a Xylos phase through a wall on the monitor, its form a nightmare of shifting darkness, he knew regulations were dead. "Do it," he said, the words final. "Kim, you and Anna figure out this signal. Use the main comm array. Doctor, with me. We need to buy them time." The next hour was a frantic, terrifying scramble. Park and Min-ji met a small, armed team armed with plasma cutters and welding torches. The only physical tools that seemed to momentarily disrupt the Xylos, formed to seal the final corridors leading to the core and the comms tower. It was a close, dark fight in the shuddering hallways. The whispers were a physical force here, a cold that seeped into the bones. One security officer, Choi, faltered, the despair overwhelming him. He lowered his cutter, a blank smile on his face, and walked towards a shimmering darkness. Park had to drag him back, the man sobbing quietly in the comms room. Kim Tae-shik was a man possessed. Sweat dripped from his brow as he rewired systems, trying to make the damaged array do something it was never designed for. The signal was incredibly complex, a multi-layered scream into subspace. Leanna guided him, her linguist's mind parsing the data into practical steps. "It's not just a message, it's a pattern," she insisted. "A pattern of chaos. See? The resonance isn't steady. It's random, but within a specific chaotic algorithm. It's like a scream with a particular fingerprint." "The power draw will be immense," Kim muttered, bypassing 3 safety protocols. "We'll be burning out the main coupling. We get one shot, maybe 30 seconds of broadcast before the array melts." "That's all we need," Anna said, her eyes fixed on the symbols. Just one clear shout into the dark. Back in the core, the survivors huddled together. The lights flickered violently. A new sound joined the mental whispers, a physical, scratching, scraping sound from the other side of the reinforced door. The Xylos were no longer just phasing. They were trying to get in. Kim, status. Park barked into his comb. Almost. Ready? Kim's voice was strained. Priming the sequence. The pattern is loaded. It's ready? Park looked at Minji and at the terrified crew. He gave a single sharp nod. Do it. In the comms room, Kim Tae-shik took a deep breath. His finger hovered over the final command. For what it's worth, he said to Aina. It was an honor to work with you. He pressed the key. The outpost groaned. Every light died, plunging them into utter blackness, save for the red emergency strips on the floor. A deep, subaudible thrum vibrated through the deck plates, rising in pitch and intensity. On the main array, a burst of power unlike anything on the standard charts shot into the void. It wasn't a clean, focused beam. It was a wild, spreading ripple of discordant energy, carrying the chaotic pattern, the atomic signature. The scream for help dot outside. The effect was instantaneous. The shadowy Xylos, gathered around the outpost like vultures, recoiled as one. Their forms, usually so fluid, jerked and spasmed. A new sound erupted from them, not a psychic whisper, but a screech of pure, undiluted panic that pierced the mental static and was heard with actual ears. It was a sound of recognition, of deep, ancestral terror. They writhed, pulling back from the outpost, their focus completely shattered by the familiar, hated signal now erupting from the comm tower. For 30 seconds, the signal blared. Inside, the crew clutched their heads, the new noise a different kind of pain. Then, with a shower of sparks and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry, the comm array died. The deep thrum ceased. The emergency lights flickered back on. Weak and yellow dot silence returned. But it was a new silence. The constant psychic pressure had lessened, replaced by a buzzing confusion from outside. The scraping at the door had stopped. Kim and Aina stumbled back into the core, their faces smudged with soot. It's done, Kim said, slumping against a wall. The signal is gone. They waited. Minutes ticked by, measured only by the pounding of their hearts. Nothing happened. No miraculous salvation. No new monster appeared. The Xylos, after their initial panic, seemed to be regrouping, their shadowy forms gathering again at the edge of the clearing, a dark, seething mass of hatred. The hope that had flared for a moment died, leaving a colder, heavier despair. Kim Tae-shik let out a bitter laugh. A ghost story. We pinned our hopes on a ghost story. Captain Park closed his eyes, the weight of his decision crushing him. He had doomed them to die with a final, foolish act. Liana sank to the floor, hugging her knees. She had been so sure. The logs were so clear. Beware the unsilenced dot, and then 12 hours later, the sky tore open. The 12 hours after the signal were the longest of their lives. The Xylos did not attack again, not directly. They gathered in the dark forest, a silent, seething ring of shadow just beyond the energy shield's dead emitters. Their psychic whispers returned, but changed. Before, it had been a hungry, probing despair. Now it was a chorus of cold, focused fear, and a hatred so sharp it felt like needles in the mind. They were waiting, watching the sky. Inside the core, the crew waited too, trapped in a limbo of exhaustion and dying hope. Dr. Lee Min-ji monitored the few remaining sensors. Kim Tae-shik, in a fit of grim determination, had managed to restore partial internal power, so the lights were on and the air was breathable, but little else. Captain Park Jun paced, a caged animal, checking and rechecking the sealed door that was the only thing between them and the phantoms outside. Liana just sat, her knees drawn up, staring at nothing, the data slate dark in her lap. It was for nothing, Kim finally said, his voice hollow. He gestured at a monitor showing the forest edge. They're still there. We just annoyed them. No, Ana whispered, not looking up. We scared them. They're not whispering about despair anymore. They're whispering about the signal. They're afraid. Of what? Empty space? Kim snapped. Before Ana could answer, the outpost shuddered. This was not the psychic tremor they had grown used to. This was a physical, violent jolt that rattled their teeth and threw loose equipment from tables. A deafening boom of displaced air and tearing metal echoed through the structure, coming from outside. Everyone scrambled. Park slapped the control for the external camera feed. The screen fizzed with static, then resolved. They saw it. A column of smoke and steam rose from the edge of the Kell forest, about 500 meters from the outpost's main airlock. The trees were shattered, laid flat in a perfect circle. In the center, half buried in the soft, glowing moss of Kelvar, was a sleek, angular pod. It was not like their own bulky shuttles. It was all sharp edges and scarred, non-reflective black metal, like a weapon that had been fired from a gun. Heat rippled off its surface, distorting the air dot as they watched. A hatch on its side blew out with the explosive charge, landing 20 feet away. A figure emerged. It was not a giant. It was roughly the size of Captain Park. It wore armor of the same dark, scarred material as the pod, encasing it from head to toe. The armor was bulky, practical, covered in hard points and pouches, but it moved without a sound. The human took 2 steps from the pod and stopped. Its helmeted head tilted, first towards the ring of Xylos at the forest's edge, then slowly, deliberately, turned to face the outpost camera. A new wave of psychic noise hit the crew, but it did not come from the Xylos. It came from the clearing. It wasn't a whisper. It was a pressure, a solid, dense wall of silent, focused will. It felt like standing next to a roaring furnace of pure thought. Where the Xylos' touch was cold and invasive, this was a radiating heat of singular, unbroken consciousness. The Xylos shrieked in unison, their shadowy forms recoiling further into the woods, their fear now palpable. Vibrating terror in the air, the human simply stood there for a moment, surveying the battlefield. Then it began to walk. Its gait was not hurried, but heavy and purposeful. It walked directly towards the outpost's main airlock, ignoring the Xylos completely, as if they were merely insects. It's coming here. Minji breathed. Panic erupted in the core. Do we open the airlock? Someone cried. It could be worse than them. Captain Park's mind raced. The thing had come from the void in response to their call. It had sent the Xylos, their unstoppable predators, into a panic with its mere presence. It was now walking to their front door. To refuse it seemed both pointless and incredibly dangerous. Kim cycled the outer lock, let it into the decon chamber. But keep the inner lock sealed. I'll meet it there. He grabbed a sidearm from a locker, not knowing if it would be any more use against this than against the Xylos, but needing the weight of it in his hand. The core's door hissed open for Park, then sealed behind him. He stood alone in the short corridor leading to the main airlock's inner door. He could hear the muffled, mechanical sounds of the outer lock cycling through the thick hull. His heart hammered against his ribs. The psychic pressure from the other side of the door was immense. A silent, waiting storm. A green light flashed on the panel. The outer lock was secure. The decon cycle was complete. With a final, steadying breath, Park hit the control to open the inner door. Slid open with a sigh of equalizing pressure. The human filled the doorway. Up close, the armor was even more imposing, scratched and pitted from countless re-entries and impacts. It stood perfectly still. Droplets of Kelvar's glowing moss and condensation from the decon spray still sliding down its dark plates. Park could see his own pale, wide-eyed reflection in the helmet's blank visor. He cleared his throat, his voice sounding small. "I am Captain Park Jun of the Research Outpost Echo of Serenity. We summoned you." The human did not reply with words. Its helmet tilted slightly, as if studying him. Then, with a series of soft hisses and clicks, the armor seals disengaged. The helmet split along an invisible seam and retracted, folding back into the collar. The face underneath was not a monster's face. It was a human man's face, perhaps in his late 40s. He had short, dark hair cropped close to his scalp, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and deep-set eyes that were a calm, tired brown. He looked weathered, like a stone worn smooth by a relentless river. There were old scars, a faint white line across his chin, another near his temple. He looked at Park, then past him, as if assessing the corridor, the state of the outpost. His eyes held no madness, no predatory glee. They held a profound, weary focus. He took a single step into the corridor, and Park instinctively stepped back. The man's voice, when it came, was a low, rough grate, like stone on stone. He spoke in plain, unaccented universal. "Where are they?" The question was so simple, so direct, it took Park a moment to understand. The Xylos? They're outside, in the forest. They've breached the lower decks. The man Jinsu, his name would be, gave a slow, single nod. His eyes flicked to the sidearm in Park's hand, then back to his face. A flicker of something that might have been amusement or pity touched his mouth. "That won't work." "We know," Park said, lowering the weapon, feeling foolish. "They're psychic. They get into your mind." Jinsu tapped the side of his own temple with a gloved finger. The gesture was blunt, final. "They can't get in here." He said it not as a boast, but as a simple statement of fact, like saying water was wet. Too much noise. Too much static. Your minds are quiet. Easy to harmonize. To overwhelm. He looked past Park again, towards the corridor, as if he could see the terrified crew through it. "How many are left?" "Functional. 12. In the core. Good. Keep them there." Jinsu's helmet began to reform over his head, the plates sliding silently back into place. "The nest. The focal point. Where is it?" Park pulled up a schematic on a wall panel, his hands shaking slightly. He pointed to the central spire of the outpost, the main habitation and lab wing, now dark on the map. "Their energy signatures are concentrated here. In the main atrium. It's changed. There's some kind of organic growth." Jinsu studied the map for 2 seconds. "I'll start there. They'll cluster on me. It will pull them off your walls. When I break their focal point, the ones outside will scatter." He turned and began to walk back towards the airlock. "Wait." Park called out. "You're going out there? Alone? What are you going to do?" The human paused at the airlock door. The blank visor turned back towards Park. "My job." The door slid open, revealing the decon chamber and the outer hatch to the world beyond. "You called for the unsilenced. You got one. Now stay quiet." He stepped through, and the door sealed shut, leaving Captain Park Jun alone in the sudden, echoing silence, more bewildered and hopeful than he had been in days. The inner airlock door sealed with a solid, final clunk. Captain Park stood alone for a moment, the human's last words echoing in the silent corridor. "Stay quiet." The psychic pressure, that solid wall of will, was gone, moving away from him. He took a shaky breath and hurried back to the core. Inside, everyone was gathered around the main monitor. Kim Tae-shik had patched together a feed from the few external cameras that still worked. The image was grainy, but clear enough. They watched as the outer airlock cycled open, and the human, Jinsu, stepped out onto the moss of Kelvar. He stood for a second, a solitary, dark figure against the glowing blue vegetation. Immediately, the ring of Xylos in the forest reacted. Their shadowy forms, which had been a still and watchful wall, began to seethe and churn. A wave of psychic distress washed over the outpost, so sharp it made Leanna whimper and clamp her hands over her ears. It was not an attack. It was pure, instinctive recoil. The whispers became a shrieking chorus of alarm. Jin-Su did not run. He began to walk, not towards the forest where the Xylos hid, but directly towards the main entrance of the outpost's habitation wing, the breached section where Park had said the nest was. He moved with that same heavy, deliberate pace, as if taking a stroll. "He's just walking," Dr. Lee Min-ji whispered, her scientific fascination battling her terror. As he crossed the open ground, the Xylos struck, not with physical limbs, but with their full psychic force. On the monitor, the crew saw nothing, but they felt it. A concentrated lance of psychic energy, a wave of projected nightmares and soul-crushing despair, slammed into the human from multiple directions. It was the same force that had shattered their crewmates' minds in seconds. Jin-Su staggered. Just once, his boot slipped slightly in the soft moss. He stopped walking, his head bowing for a moment, as if under a great weight. On his armor, small, unseen energy fields flickered, dispersing some residual static. A thin trickle of blood, black in the monitor's gloom, dripped from his nose and traced a path down his sealed chin guard. "He's hurt," Kim said, a strange mix of hope and despair in his voice. But then Jin-Su straightened. He lifted his head, his helmeted gaze sweeping the tree line. He took another step, then another. The psychic onslaught continued, a constant, furious barrage, but he was moving again. He was not fighting the whispers. He was walking through them. He's not blocking it, Min-ji realized, her eyes wide. He's enduring it. His mind is too loud for them to harmonize with. It's just noise to him. Painful, distracting noise, but just noise. They watched, awestruck, as he reached the jagged hole the Xylos had torn in the outpost's hull. He didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness of their own overrun home. The view switched to a shaky, internal camera feed from the habitation wing atrium. The sight made them gasp. The familiar space was gone. In its place was a grotesque, organic structure. Webbing of a dark, nerve-like material crawled up the walls and across the ceiling, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. In the center of the room, where the water feature had been, was a large, bulging mound. It looked like a brain made of shadows and solidified fear, veined with glowing purple energy. It was the source. The neural queen dot around it, dozens of Xylos forms shifted and swirled, more solid here, more real. They were feeding the queen, channeling the stolen consciousness of the crew into it. Jin-Su appeared at the far entrance. The Xylos in the atrium whirled towards him. Their psychic shrieks of rage and terror were so intense the camera feed distorted. They abandoned the queen and surged towards him, not as phantoms, but as physical attackers, their shadowy limbs condensing into sharp, chitinous claws. This, it seemed, was what he had been waiting for. The silent walk was over. He moved. One hand went to his back and came away with a weapon. It was not a sleek plasma rifle. It was a heavy, blocky thing with a thick barrel, a kinetic weapon. The other hand drew a long, straight blade from his thigh. The blade hummed to life, its edge vibrating with a low, deadly buzz. He did not shout. He fought in a grim, efficient silence. The kinetic gun roared, a shocking, physical sound in the psychic storm. Each shot was a deafening blast that tore through the semi-corporeal forms of the Xylos. not vaporizing them, but violently disrupting their cohesion, sending them flying apart into dissipating mist. When they got too close, the vibro blade flashed. It cut through their shadow stuff as if it were flesh, the vibrating edge causing their forms to unravel with a sizzling shriek. He was not invincible. Claws raked across his armor, leaving deep gouges in the dark metal. One lucky strike caught him on the shoulder, spinning him around. But he never stopped. He was a moving point of chaos, a storm of loud thoughts and louder violence, carving a path through the swirling darkness towards the pulsing neural queen. "He's hurting them," Captain Park said, understanding dawning. "He said they'd cluster on him. He's drawing all their attention, all their rage, away from everything else." Minji nodded, watching the blood still trickling from the human's nose on the feed. The psychic pressure must be unimaginable in there. He's holding the entire storm in his head while fighting them physically. Jin-Su reached the base of the Queen's mound. The remaining Xylos threw themselves at him in a final, desperate wave. He dropped the empty kinetic gun, gripped his vibroblade in both hands, and spun. A whirlwind of humming steel that cleared a space around him. Then he turned to the Queen. The massive, brain-like entity pulsed, and a final, concentrated beam of pure psychic energy, containing the stolen memories and despair of the entire captured crew, lanced directly into him. On the monitor, they saw Jin-Su drop to one knee. His whole body shuddered. More blood, now from his ears, stained his collar. The armor systems flashed urgent warnings. The crew in the core felt the echo of that blast, a wave of such profound sadness it brought tears to their eyes. They saw the faces of their lost friends flash in their minds. The human knelt, head bowed for what felt like an eternity, pinned under the weight of 100 stolen minds. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up. He forced himself back to his feet. He took one heavy step, then another, up the side of the organic mound towards the core of the Queen. The psychic beam still poured into him, but he was moving against it, a man walking into a hurricane. He raised his humming blade. The Queen throbbed, a final, pathetic whisper of fear rushing against all their minds. Jin-Su's voice, amplified by his helmet, broke the silence for the first time since he had entered the nest. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, rasping, vocal snarl, raw and real, and completely alien to the Xylos' form of communication. "You whisper," he growled, the words thick with strain. He plunged the vibroblade deep into the glowing heart of the Neural Queen. The vibroblade sank into the Neural Queen with a sound that was not a sound. It was a psychic detonation, a silent white flash that overloaded every sensor and screen in the outpost's core. The monitor went black. The crew stumbled back, clutching their heads. It wasn't pain. It was a sudden, shocking absence. The constant, oily whisper that had been the background noise of their lives for days was simply gone, snuffed out. The silence that followed was so deep it felt physical, like a vacuum in their souls. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. They just breathed, feeling the strange, quiet emptiness of their own minds. Unviolated for the first time, Captain Park was the first to break the stillness. He rushed to the control panel, his hands fumbling as he switched to different camera feeds. The external views flickered to life. The ring of Xylos at the forest's edge was gone. Not hiding, gone. In their place were only the normal deep shadows of the Kell forest. He switched to the internal feed for the atrium. The image was dark, the organic webbing now inert, its sickly light extinguished. The mound of the Queen was a collapsed, gray husk. And in the middle of the ruin, a single dark figure stood, pulling his blade free from the crumbling mass. "He's alive," Park breathed. They watched, transfixed, as the figure Jin-Su turned and began the long walk back. His pace was slower now, his steps uneven. He limped slightly, and one arm hung at an awkward angle. He did not look at the cameras. He simply walked through the shattered atrium, down the dark corridors they had sealed off hours before. A trail of his own blood, dark against the gray floor. Marking his path dot by the time he reached the airlock corridor, they were all waiting. Park had the inner door open. The human stood there, a silhouette against the brighter light of the core. His armor was a ruin of deep gouges and scorch marks. The helmet retracted with a tired hiss, revealing his face. He was pale beneath the blood smears, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. The calm focus was still there, but it was the focus of a man at the very end of his strength. He looked at them, his gaze sweeping over the 12 survivors. Ming-Ji. Her professional composure shattered into pure awe. Kim Tae-shik, whose skepticism had been burned away. Lee Aina, who stared at him as if he were a figure from her own history texts made flesh. And Captain Park, standing straight, a formal gratitude warring with shock on his face. Jin-Soo took a stumbling step into the corridor, and his leg buckled. Dr. Minji was there in an instant. Not as a xenobiologist, but as a physician. She caught his arm, guiding him to sit against the wall. "You're hurt. Let me." He waved her off with his good arm, a short, sharp gesture. Superficial. The armor took most of it. His voice was a dry rasp. "The deep stuff in my head. That'll take a while." He looked at Park. "The focal point is broken. The Xylo's outside. They've lost the high frequency. They're just animals now, scattered, confused. They won't come back to this place. The memory of the signal, and of me, will keep them away." Kim Tae-shik found his voice. "What? What are you, really?" Jin-Soo leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. "Containment specialist. Xenopsychic Contaminant Division. Human Exploration Fleet." He said it like a mechanic listing his trade. "You had an infestation. You called the exterminator. But the unsilenced?" Lee Aina whispered, the historian in her unable to let it go. Devoid of thought? A faint, tired ghost of a smile touched Jin-Soo's cracked lips. "Poetry. Their poetry. Their minds work on harmony, resonance. A quiet, shared song. Our minds—" He tapped his temple again, the gesture weaker now. Noise, static, a million different channels screaming at once. Memories, songs, math, rage, love, what to have for dinner. To them, it's chaos. It's a void because they can't hear the music in it. To enter a human mind is to drown in a hurricane of will. We are unsilenced. It's not a weapon we built. It's just what we are. The simplicity of it stunned them. Their salvation was not a superweapon, but a biological quirk. A glorious, terrifying defect. What about the others? Minji asked softly, gesturing towards the dark halls where their crewmates lay. The ones they took? Jin-Soo's face hardened. The weary look vanished, replaced by something colder. Gone. What the Queen took, it consumes. It doesn't store. I felt them. At the end. They were used as fuel. I'm sorry. The apology was blunt, final, allowing for no false hope. Captain Park nodded, the last of his own hope dying, replaced by a grim acceptance. You saved those of us who were left. That is enough. He straightened. We owe you a debt. Our government, our people. Jin-Soo shook his head, cutting him off. No debt. This is my job. The signal is a last resort contract. Consider it fulfilled. He began the laborious process of getting to his feet, using the wall for support. Your long-range comms will come back online in a few hours. Call for a proper recovery ship. Get off this rock. You're leaving? Now, Kim asked, incredulous. In your condition? My pod has a medical suite. It'll stabilize me. My ship will be in retrieval range in 6 hours. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering for a second on Laiana, who had found the signal, and on Park, who had made the choice to send it. You did the right thing. It was the only thing. Remember that. He turned and began the slow, painful walk back down the corridor to the airlock. No one tried to stop him. They watched him go, this battered, ordinary-seeming man who carried a psychic hurricane in his skull, who had walked into their nightmare and silenced it with the sheer volume of his being. At the airlock door, he paused. He didn't look back. His voice, still rough, carried down the corridor. And next time, he said, try a radio distress call first. The door hissed shut behind him. They stood in the quiet core, the hum of the life support systems now the loudest thing they could hear. It was a gentle, mechanical sound. A simple noise, not a whisper. Through the viewport, they saw his black pod, now scarred and stained with alien matter, ignite its ascent thrusters. With a silent burst of light, it punched through the atmosphere of Kelvar, a dark arrow returning to the void from whence it came. Captain Park finally let out a long, shaky breath. He looked at his crew, saw the same dazed understanding in their eyes. They had been saved not by a god or a demon, but by a tired workman from a species that was, by its very nature, immune to monsters. The universe was a stranger, more terrifying, and more wonderful place than they had known. Outside, the first of Gelvar's floating jelly spores, drawn back by the silence, drifted past the viewport, glowing softly in the dark. The quiet was no longer a threat. It was just peace. A peace bought, they now understood, by the most terrible and beautiful noise in the cosmos.